For 3 years, I wired $2,000 every single month to keep my parents' business from going under. Skipping vacations, driving a car with a cracked windshield I couldn't afford to fix, eating cereal for dinner more nights than I want to admit. And then at my brother's engagement party, my father stood up in front of 40 people, raised his glass, and said my brother was the one who saved everything. I didn't cry. I didn't make a scene. I just picked up my phone. You need to understand what the last 3 years looked like before I tell you what happened next, because the numbers matter, and the numbers don't lie. My father, Gus, built a small HVAC contracting business from nothing in the late 90s. 2 trucks, a handful of residential accounts, and a reputation in our suburb of Columbus that he had spent 20 years earning. He wasn't rich, but he was proud. When I was growing up, the business was the centerpiece of every family dinner conversation, every holiday toast, every story he told at church. It was his identity in a way that was almost uncomfortable to watch. Then he had a stroke. He was 61. It happened on a Tuesday morning in February, right in the middle of the busy season. And it left him with partial weakness in his right hand and a cognitive fogginess that made running payroll, managing estimates, and keeping up with licensing renewals suddenly impossible. He recovered enough to walk and talk normally within 6 months, but the business side of things, the spreadsheets, the contracts, the billing cycles, those never fully came back. My mother, who everyone calls Bev, had been the bookkeeper for 30 years, but she was also 63 and dealing with her own health situation, a chronic back condition that had been slowly narrowing her world down to the kitchen and the recliner. She wasn't going to step up and run operations. She had never wanted to. My brother Cliff was the obvious choice. He had grown up in the shop the same way I had. He had actually gone to trade school, gotten his HVAC certification, done a few years working the trucks. He knew the business better than I did. He was the natural successor. But Cliff had married Renata 2 years before my father's stroke, and Renata had opinions. She had grown up wealthy, in a suburb of Cleveland, in a house with a pool, and she had a very clear picture of what her life was supposed to look like. Cliff running his dad's struggling HVAC company in Columbus was not part of that picture. She wanted him in a management role at a larger company. She wanted a house in Dublin. She wanted a life that felt, in her words, stable. Stable. That was her word. She used it constantly, like a mantra, like if she said it enough times it would make Cliff's inheritance feel less appealing. So Cliff stepped back. Not all at once, not in a way that anyone acknowledged out loud. He just got very busy. He got a job as a field supervisor for a regional mechanical contractor, which was legitimate and paid well, and he told my parents he would help on weekends when he could. But weekends became occasional Saturdays, and occasional Saturdays became showing up for holidays. I was 28 when my father had his stroke. I was working as a senior claims analyst at an insurance company, which is exactly as glamorous as it sounds. I wasn't making a fortune, but I was organized, I understood contracts, and I was the daughter who lived 20 minutes away instead of 90. I sat at my parents' kitchen table in March of that year, 3 weeks after my father came home from inpatient rehab, and I laid out a plan. I would cover the business shortfall every month, the gap between their receivables and their fixed costs, while they figured out a longer-term solution. We agreed on $2,000 a month. We shook on it. My father's good hand, my hand. Do you know what $2,000 a month feels like when you're 28 and living alone in a city where a decent one-bedroom runs $1,400? It feels like the cracked windshield you stop calling about. It feels like the bridesmaid dress you buy and then quietly skip the bachelorette trip. It feels like declining every spontaneous plan and saying, "I'm saving," when what you really mean is, "I'm sending." I didn't tell anyone. Not my coworkers, not my friends, not my father's guys at the shop. My mother knew because she was the one managing the account the transfers went into. We called every month when the transfer cleared, a short call, usually just her saying, "Got it, sweetheart, thank you," and me saying, "How are things?" and us both pretending the arrangement was temporary. It wasn't temporary. Month 1 became month 12 became month 36. In that time, my brother came to my parents' house for Christmas and Thanksgiving and the occasional Sunday. He brought wine. He fixed a wobbly fence post once. He and Renata took my parents to brunch on their anniversary. It was very nice. My father beamed at him the way fathers beam at sons who show up and seem solid. I was not beamed at. I was just there, dependable, quiet, present. The daughter who dropped off groceries when my mother's back flared up, who sat on the phone with the insurance company when the business policy got complicated, who managed the vendor relationships after my father's billing software needed an upgrade and neither of my parents could figure out the new interface. I was the load-bearing wall of that family. I just didn't have my name on the architectural plans. The engagement party was held at a rented event space in Westerville, which is a suburb northeast of Columbus, one of those venues that does corporate retreats and baby showers, and apparently also the party Renata had been planning for 4 months since Cliff proposed. There were 40-something guests, fairy lights, a catered buffet, and a slideshow of Cliff and Renata's most photogenic moments running on a loop behind the bar. I arrived alone. I wore a blue dress I had owned for 3 years, and worn to so many events that I had started to feel invisible in it, which was perhaps appropriate. My mother found me near the entrance and hugged me quickly, her eyes already working the room, monitoring Renata's reaction to everything the way mothers of grooms do when they're trying not to cause offense. "You look tired," she told me. "I'm fine," I said. "Cliff looks so happy," she said, which was not what I had asked. He did look happy. Cliff has always had that quality, the ability to occupy a room with his physical ease. The kind of man who seems to know where to stand and when to laugh and how to make people feel like they're in the right place. Renata was beside him, wearing something that probably cost more than my car payment, her hair done up in a way that looked effortless and wasn't. She hugged me when I congratulated them and then turned to the next guest so smoothly, I barely felt the transition. I got a drink. I found a seat near my father's old foreman, a guy named Artie who had been with the business for 15 years and who I had essentially been helping keep employed for the last 3 years without him knowing it. We talked shop. It was fine. The toast happened maybe 90 minutes in, when the dinner portion had settled, and people were loose and soft at the edges the way they get after 2 glasses of wine. My father stood up. He's not a big man, never was, but he has a certain gravity. The kind built from decades of being taken seriously, and even with the stroke recovery, even with the slight tremor he's never fully lost. When Gus stands up in a room, people pay attention. He talked about the business first, he always does. He talked about what it meant to build something, to hand it down, to know that the name on the trucks would still mean something after you were gone. He got a little emotional, which he never used to do before the stroke, and you could see people leaning in, moved by it. And then he said Cliff's name. He said Cliff had stepped up when it counted. He said Cliff had kept the business breathing, had been the backbone of the family through the hardest stretch, had shown what it meant to be a real partner to his parents in a crisis. He raised his glass and said, "To my son, who made sure we didn't lose everything." The room applauded. Renata teared up. Or performed tearing up. I was too far away to know which. Cliff looked genuinely moved, which was the strangest part, because I couldn't tell if he actually believed what my father was saying, or if he had just heard it so many times that he had started to. I sat there with my glass in my hand, and I felt the room tilt slightly, the way it does when something happens that your body registers before your brain does. I looked at my mother. She was clapping. She was smiling at Cliff with that full-body smile she saves for things she's genuinely proud of. She did not look at me. I thought about the autodraft confirmation emails I'd gotten every single month for 36 months. I thought about the month I overdrew my personal checking account because an unexpected car repair hit 2 days before my transfer to my parents cleared, and I had to borrow $200 from a coworker and was too embarrassed to explain why. I thought about the business bank account I had co-access to, the one I had set up when my father's cognizance got spotty, the one I had been using to pay vendors and keep the licensing current and make sure the guys got their checks on time. I put my drink down. I didn't stand up. I didn't make a speech. I just picked up my phone and opened the banking app, the one with the business account, and I sat there for a moment looking at 36 months of transaction history while the applause settled around me. My father caught my eye. He smiled. It was a genuine smile, warm, the kind that used to make me feel like a kid who had done something right, but this time it landed wrong because I realized he wasn't smiling at me specifically. He was smiling at the room, at the whole scene he had just orchestrated, and I just happened to be in his sightline. I waited until the party had loosened back up, until people had gone back to their conversations and Cliff and Renata were making their rounds. Then I walked over to my father. He was standing near the bar talking to one of his old friends from church, and when I touched his elbow, he excused himself and turned to me with that easy after-toast glow. "Nice speech," I said. "Thank you, sweetheart." He put a hand on my shoulder. "You doing okay? You've been quiet tonight." "I'm fine," I said. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When you said Cliff kept the business breathing," I said, keeping my voice completely level, "what specifically were you thinking of? I'm just curious." My father blinked. The question was more direct than he expected from me, but I'm not a confrontational person by nature, and he wasn't prepared for precision. "Well, he's been helping out," he said. "He's been there. You know how Cliff is." "I do," I said. "I was wondering about the specific financial piece. Who's been covering the monthly operating shortfall?" He hesitated. "Your mother handles all of that." "Right," I said. "So you're not sure?" "I mean, we've had some support from the family, and Cliff has." "Dad," I said. I opened the banking app and turned it around so he could see the screen. "I want to show you something." He squinted at my phone the way people his age do when they're not sure if they're about to understand what they're looking at. I walked him through it the way I would walk a client through a claim file. April payment, May payment, June. I showed him the memo lines on every transfer. I showed him my name as the originating account holder. I showed him 36 consecutive months. "These are from your account?" he said slowly. "Yes." You've been sending money every month?" $2,000 a month," I said. "For 3 years. It started the spring after your stroke. You and I made the arrangement. Mom and I kept it going." He stared at the screen for a long time. Long enough that his friend from church glanced over to see if everything was okay. "But your mother said the shortfall was being covered," he said finally. "She said Cliff was helping." "Mom knew where the money was coming from," I said, still calm. "I transferred it into the joint account she manages every month, she can tell you." I watched the understanding move through him slowly, like a weather system crossing a plain. You could see it in the way his face changed. Not all at once, but in stages. First confusion, then recalibration, then something that looked almost like grief. "Why didn't you say anything?" he asked. "I didn't need credit," I said. "I just needed the business to stay open and the guys to keep their jobs. I didn't think I needed to announce it." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Where is your mother?" "We found her near the dessert table, talking to one of Renata's aunts. When my father touched her arm, she looked up with that bright party face she wears, but it flickered when she saw his expression." "Gus," she said, "is everything." "The transfers," he said. "Every month. They've been from Scarl." He stopped. He looked at me. "From you," he corrected himself. My mother's party face dissolved, but replaced it with something I hadn't seen from her before. Not guilt, exactly, but the look of someone who has been managing 2 separate narratives for so long that having them collapse into each other is physically disorienting. "I can explain," she said. "I'm listening," my father said. She glanced around at the party, at the fairy lights, at the slideshow still cycling through Cliff and Renata's best moments. "Not here," she said quietly. "Gus, please, not here." "Then tomorrow," he said. "We're going to talk about this tomorrow." She nodded. She looked at me, and her expression was complicated. Not angry, not apologetic, something in between. Something that said we were going to have a very long conversation, and she was already tired of it. I let my father handle that part of the evening. I went back to my seat and I finished my drink and I watched my brother give toasts and accept congratulations, and I thought about what I actually wanted out of whatever was going to happen next. The morning after is a separate story and a harder one. We sat at my parents' kitchen table, me, my father, my mother, and eventually Cliff, who my father called at 7 a.m. and told to come over, which Cliff did with visible reluctance and the particular expression of a man who already knows something has shifted under his feet. My mother explained what she had been doing, which was, in her words, making everyone feel good. She had let my father believe Cliff was more involved than he was because she wanted my father to feel supported by his son. She had let Cliff believe his occasional presence was meaningful because she didn't want him to feel guilty about living his life. And she had let me carry the actual weight because I was the one who offered, the one who was nearby, the one who she knew would do it without complaint. "I thought you didn't mind," she said to me, which is the sentence I keep coming back to. "I didn't mind helping," I said. "I mind being invisible." Cliff was quiet for most of that conversation, which is unusual for him. He sat with his coffee and he listened. And when my mother finished explaining, he looked at me and he said, "I didn't know." And I believed him. That was the part I had to sit with. He genuinely hadn't known. No one had told him there was a gap. No one had told him it needed covering. He had shown up when it felt easy and no one had ever said, "But it's not enough." "I should have asked more questions," he said. "Yeah," I said. "You should have." Renata's name did not come up directly, but she was in the room the way people are when they're the reason a thing went the way it did, hovering in the background of every sentence without being named. My father didn't make a speech that morning. He's not that kind of person at a kitchen table in daylight. But he said something that I want to get exactly right because I've thought about it many times since. He said, "I've been watching the wrong things." That was it. Not an elaborate apology, just that. A quiet acknowledgement that his attention had been pointed at the surface of things and he had missed what was underneath. I cried a little, which I had not planned to do. My mother cried a lot, which was inevitable. Cliff stared at the table and then eventually got up and stood behind me and put his hand on my shoulder in a way that was clumsy and genuine. We worked out the practical parts over the following weeks. I didn't withdraw my support abruptly. That would have hurt the business and the employees, and I had no interest in doing that. But I formalized the arrangement. I drew up a simple agreement with clear terms, got it notarized, set a timeline for the business to either become self-sustaining or find a structured exit. I opened a separate business operating account and I was the only signatory on the daily transactions. No more routing through my mother's personal account. No more ambiguity about where the money was going or where it came from. Cliff started coming around more, not in a performing way, in a practical way, helping with scheduling, talking to the crews, taking calls my father used to handle. Whether that was guilt or growth, I can't say. Probably both. The business is stable now. Not thriving, but stable. Covering its own costs most months, with a modest cushion. My father hired a part-time office manager, which was something I had been suggesting for 2 years, and the difference is visible in how calm the operations feel. Renata sends me a nice text on my birthday now. I respond politely. We're not close, and I don't expect we will be, but the hostility has bled out of it, replaced by the kind of careful courtesy that families develop when they've been through something and decided to stay in each other's lives anyway. I bought myself a new car in the spring. Nothing extravagant, a sensible sedan with working everything, no dashboard lights that shouldn't be on, no crossed fingers every time I merged onto the freeway. I drove it to my parents' house the first weekend after I got it, and my father walked around it in the driveway the way he used to walk around a new truck at the shop, approving it with small nods. "Good choice," he said. "I've been saving," I said. He looked at me for a moment and there was something in it, not just the car, not just the sentence, but everything it meant. He knew. He knows. He reached out and put his hand on my arm, rough and warm and steadier than it used to be. "You've always made good choices," he said. I just wasn't paying close enough attention. I didn't need a party. I didn't need a toast in front of 40 people or a slideshow or fairy lights. I just needed one person in that family to finally look at the right thing and see it clearly. It took a while, and it cost me more than it should have, but the ledger is balanced now, and for the first time in 3 years, when the first of the month comes, I don't check the transfer confirmation. I just live my life. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that comes not from the work itself but from being invisible while you do it. I know that exhaustion well. I lived inside it for 3 years, wiring $2,000 every month, managing vendor calls, keeping the payroll moving, all while my father looked at my brother's easy smile and called it salvation. What I've come to understand is that what happened at that engagement party wasn't an accident. It was the natural result of a pattern that had been building quietly for years. My mother kept 2 separate stories running at once because she thought she was protecting everyone. My brother let himself be credited for things he hadn't done because no one ever handed him a reason to ask harder questions. And I stayed quiet because I told myself I didn't need recognition. When the truth was, I had just never asked for it. Each of those choices, stacked on top of each other, made that toast possible. Cause and effect, playing out in a banquet hall with fairy lights. The thing about doing the right thing in secret is that secrecy has a cost no one calculates up front. I was so committed to being the dependable one, the no-drama one, that I had made it structurally easy for everyone around me to overlook what I was actually doing. I had essentially removed myself from the ledger. That wasn't noble. That was a mistake I dressed up as virtue. What pulled everything into the light wasn't anger. It was precision. When I sat across from my father the morning after and walked him through the transaction history, I wasn't performing. I was just telling the truth in a language that couldn't be reinterpreted. Numbers, dates, account names. The clarity I had spent years building in my professional life turned out to be the exact thing my personal life needed. Knowing how to document, how to trace, how to present evidence without emotion. That capacity, earned through years of grinding work in a field most people find boring. That's what made it possible to speak without shaking. And then I had to sit with the harder part, what to do once the truth was out. I could have blown up the business arrangement entirely. I had every right to. Instead, I drew up a formal agreement, set terms, opened a clean account. Because the goal was never to punish anyone. The goal was a sustainable situation that didn't depend on my silence to function. That required a kind of self-discipline that felt, honestly, harder than the sacrifice itself. Choosing to stay constructive when every instinct said, "You've earned the right to walk away." Gus said he had been watching the wrong things. I think about that sentence a lot. We all have a version of that problem. We watch what's loud, what's visible, what performs well in a room. The people actually holding things together are often the ones who stop noticing because they never let anything fall. I don't think my family is unusual in this. I think this is just what families do when no one builds in the habit of asking the uncomfortable question, who is actually carrying this? If I could go back, I'd ask it sooner, not out of resentment. Out of respect for my own reality. You don't have to announce your sacrifices to everyone, but you do have to be honest about them with yourself, and you do have to be willing to name them when the alternative is watching someone else get toasted for your work. The ledger is balanced now. Not perfectly, not cleanly. Family rarely is, but honestly, and that, finally, is enough.